Resident Evil. The T-virus transforms Raccoon City into a petri dish of evolution gone wrong. Umbrella Corporation's hubris births monsters that shamble through police stations and mansions alike. Here, survival isn't about defeating evil. It's about outrunning it with just enough bullets and herbs to make it through the night. Every corner hides death in increasingly twisted forms. Skinless dogs, human-sized insects, villagers who erupt into monstrous forms upon death. What makes Resident Evil terrifying isn't just its grotesque parade of mutations, but how it turns capitalism's excesses into literal monsters. Science unbound by ethics creates a world where your best friend becomes your worst nightmare between one blink and the next. The horror lies in realizing that the real monsters aren't the creatures hunting you through narrow corridors. They're the men in boardrooms calculating acceptable casualty rates while developing the next bioweapon to sell to the highest bidder. The X-Files. What lurks in the shadows of our government's deepest corridors? The X-Files reveals a world where the truth isn't just hidden, it's deliberately buried. For decades, shadowy men have orchestrated humanity's greatest deception. We are not alone. Aliens walk among us. They've made deals with our leaders. They've been here for millennia, and they have plans. FBI agent Fox Mulder stumbled upon this vast conspiracy, relegated to the basement with his X-Files. Cases of the paranormal, the unexplained, the impossible. His partner, the skeptical doctor, Dana Scully, was assigned to debunk his work. Instead, she became his reluctant ally in exposing horrors beyond comprehension. Alien abductions, government experiments, black oil that controls minds, shapeshifters hiding in plain sight, a planned colonization of Earth, the syndicate of old men playing God with humanity's future. The most terrifying revelation? The government knows everything and chooses to do nothing. Because how do you fight an enemy that can become anyone? Perhaps the truth isn't out there. Perhaps it's inside us all along. Bioshock. Rapture. A libertarian dream drowned beneath the Atlantic, where Adam Smith's invisible hand mutated into something with claws. The underwater city was built as a haven for unfettered genius, but collapsed into a nightmare aquarium where genetic modification turned dreamers into addicts. Big daddies lumber through leaking corridors, their humanity buried beneath diving suits and conditioning, protecting little sisters who extract Adam from the dead with eerie ritual. What's truly disturbing about Bioshock isn't its splicers or its underwater setting. It's how it strips bare utopian thinking to reveal the rot beneath. Every audio log tells a story of idealism curdling into monstrosity when human nature meets absolute freedom. The horror comes from recognizing ourselves in both Andrew Ryan's vision and its collapse. After all, we built our own societies on philosophies just as absolute, just as blind to human frailty. Rapture isn't just an underwater dystopia, it's a funhouse mirror reflecting our world back at us. S.T.A.L.K.E.R. The Chernobyl exclusion zone transformed by supernatural physics into a landscape of broken rules and deadly anomalies. Men called stalkers risk their lives venturing into this radioactive purgatory, seeking artifacts with impossible properties, objects that defy science but fetch high prices from collectors and researchers. The zone doesn't just kill, it warps. Mutants roam abandoned Soviet apartment blocks while gravity itself collapses in pockets that crush unwary travelers. Rival factions fight over territory that constantly shifts. Rainfall carries unseen radiation that harms on contact, and the most dangerous predator might be the man sharing your campfire. The zone's horror is existential, away, leaving only survival and greed. Yet there's beauty in its decay, a terrible freedom that draws people back despite the costs. The zone represents our future, perhaps. The world we've poisoned continuing without us, developing its own alien ecology from our catastrophic mistakes, indifferent to our presence yet shaped entirely by our failures. Perfect Blue. Mima's descent into psychological fragmentation begins with a simple career change. Pop idol to serious actress. But as her former self lingers on stage with her old group, something inside her fractures. Reality blurs. Is she being stalked, or is she the stalker? The horror in Perfect Blue comes not from supernatural threats, but from the dissolution of identity under public scrutiny. Mima's life becomes a hall of mirrors where her image is reflected, distorted, and commodified. The film's genius lies in making us feel her disorientation as scenes repeat with subtle differences, leaving us questioning which version was real. When Mima discovers a website narrating her private thoughts, the boundary between performance and authenticity collapses completely. What terrifies isn't jump scares, but the way fame dismantles a person into curated versions of themselves. How eyes watching you can remake you in their image. Perfect Blue reveals the horror of losing ownership of yourself, of waking up one day to discover you've become a character someone else is writing. Jacob's Ladder. Vietnam veteran Jacob Singer's reality unravels like a poorly knitted sweater, threads of memory and hallucination, tangling until neither he nor we can distinguish between them. New York City transforms around him. Subway exits seal themselves off, faces morph into demonic visages, and hospital orderlies sprout inhuman appendages. Jacob's ladder crafts terror from uncertainty, the ground beneath our feet constantly shifting. What appears as a conspiracy thriller gradually reveals itself as something far more intimate, a dying mind's struggle to accept its own ending. The film's genius lies in making Jacob's psychological descent feel physically threatening. We experience his fractured perception as if we too are caught in the same purgatorial loop, where moments of clarity only make the subsequent descent more disorienting. The demons pursuing Jacob aren't supernatural entities, but manifestations of his refusal to relinquish life. The horror comes from recognizing our own inevitable fate in Jacob's struggle. We too will someday face that final letting go. Neon Genesis Evangelion. Teenagers pilot biomechanical giants against cosmic entities while their psyches crumble under the pressure. But this mecha setup is merely scaffolding for an apocalypse that's equally psychological and metaphysical. The real horror of Evangelion lies in its understanding that the barriers between people, our fundamental inability to truly know one another, might be more terrifying than any angel attack. As the series progresses, reality itself deteriorates. What begins as science fiction gradually reveals itself as a creation myth in reverse, where human instrumentality, the dissolution of individual consciousness into a primordial soup of shared being, becomes both salvation and annihilation. The end of Evangelion transforms this abstract concept into visceral body horror. Oceans of LCL fluid, giant rei consuming souls, and Evas suspended in the sky, bleeding as symbols of broken divinity. The terror comes from recognizing that the monstrous entities threatening humanity aren't truly alien. They're reflections of our own crushing loneliness and desperate need for connection, magnified to cosmic scale. Eraserhead. Henry Spencer exists in an industrial wasteland where radiators conceal singing women and chickens bleed and twitch on dinner plates. His girlfriend delivers a monstrous, barely human child whose constant wailing fills their claustrophobic apartment. Eraserhead's horror emanates not from what it shows, but from what it withholds. Explanations, context, the comfort of narrative logic. The soundtrack never lets us forget the machinery surrounding Henry's world. Hissing pipes, grinding gears, the ambient drone of a society that produces without purpose. Each frame feels like a nightmare photograph discovered in an abandoned factory. The baby, a skinless reptilian creature, becomes the focal point of Henry's existential dread, the physical manifestation of his fear of parenthood and sexuality. Lynch creates terror through the mundane made strange. A pencil factory becomes a hellscape, a family dinner degenerates into primal chaos. When Henry finally severs his bond with the child, the act brings not release but transcendence into pure white light, suggesting that perhaps death is the only escape from the industrial prison of existence.
Subscribe for more interesting stuff. Tell us your experience in the comments.